This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Russia, Syria, and Israel face off over the downing of a Russian plane. How will this crisis affect the fragile relationships in the region? Plus, Israel loses a man many considered a champion for the Jewish state. And Jews and Christians prepare to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles, known as Succoth. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. A senior Israeli military delegation went to Moscow in an attempt to calm Russian anger over the downing of one of its planes. Russia is blaming Israel and threatening a response. CBN Middle East Bureau correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
A Syrian missile brought down the Russian plane over the Mediterranean, killing all 15 people on board. But Russia blamed Israel for the crash, saying it was caught in the crossfire as Israeli fighter jets attacked targets in Syria.
The Israeli pilots were using the Russian aircraft as a shield and pushed it into the line of fire of the Syrian defense. Israeli
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Russian President Vladimir Putin and expressed condolences for the death of the Russian servicemen, but said the blame was on Syria. Israel established a deconfliction agreement with Russia several years ago to enable Israel to strike Iranian targets inside Syria without colliding with Russia. For Israel, maintaining that understanding is critical to its defense. The IDF released a statement saying it had followed the deconfliction agreement with the Russians in carrying out this mission. They said Syrians used extensive and inaccurate anti-aircraft fire. The Israeli Air Force jets were already in Israeli airspace when the Russian plane was hit. And during the Israeli airstrike, the Russian plane was not in the area. Former Israeli National Security Advisor Yaakov Amidror said in a telephone briefing that the strikes in Syria are a high-priority mission for Israel.
The importance of the target will not be changed. It is a very important target for Israel to prevent the Iranians from building this independent war machine in Syria and to prevent them from transferring game-changer weapon systems into the hands of Hezbollah.
United Nations Special Envoy to Syria urged the players to exercise restraint.
We call upon all parties, especially when we are getting this type of positive news regarding what could have been a dramatic military escalation, to refrain from military actions elsewhere that would only exacerbate an already complex situation.
Regarding Iran's presence in Syria, the U.S. says Iran has to go.
Iran cannot dictate the future for the Syrian people. If Russia is interested in bringing peace to Syria, it should make sure Iran and its militias leave Syria once and for all. The risk of a broader conflict will leave with them.
For now, Amidror said, the key to maintaining Israel's ability to strike inside Syria is convincing Russia that the incident wasn't Israel's fault. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
In an address at a ceremony commemorating the fallout of Israel's 1973 Yom Kippur War, Netanyahu said that Israel would do everything it could to avoid war. But if it's forced into a conflict, Israel will act with full force. Well, on Sunday, September 16th, a Palestinian teenager murdered an American-Israeli citizen, Ari Fold, in the area of Gush Etzion in Judea, also known as the West Bank. Many saw Fold as a champion of the Jewish cause in the Promised Land. Here's Julie Stahl once again.
Thousands gathered to mourn a man many Jews considered a hero.
I think that his message was the love of Israel and not the hate of the other, of the Arabs.
U.S. Ambassador David Friedman attended the funeral and tweeted, "America grieves as one of its citizens was brutally murdered by a Palestinian terrorist. Ari Fold was a passionate defender of Israel and an American patriot. He represented the best of both countries and will be deeply missed." 17-year-old Khalil Jabarin stabbed Fold in the back outside this mall in Gush Etzion. Even though he was wounded, Fold managed to chase his attacker, shoot at him, jumped over the wall behind me before he collapsed. Fold served as the deputy director of Standing Together, an organization that supports IDF soldiers. He also hosted a talk show on Middle East television. Gush Etzion Mayor Shlomo Ne'eman told CBN News it's inconceivable that a person wakes up in the morning with the thought of just killing any Jew.
There's a war here. Everyone here is a soldier in this war. It could be every child, every elderly person, every woman, and we will win this war. Terror won't help them. We're here to stay forever.
Local residents lamented his loss.
But I know that he believed in the people of Israel. He believed in the state of Israel and the land of Israel. And he was a great defender of that, and media, and social media, and willing to speak about his truth to anybody who would listen in a way that wasn't to shout louder than the other person. It was a way to present a clear, positive message of who we are and why we're here.
Fuld said he was living the dream in the land of Israel and loved the nation of Israel, its land, and the Torah. Thousands followed Fuld's views on his Facebook page.
Hey everyone, Ari Fuld here. We're broadcasting out of the beautiful rolling hills of Judea, Israel.
Fuld is survived by his wife and 4 children. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Gush Etzion, Judea.
Please keep the Fuld family in your prayers. Turning to an update on U.S. Pastor Andrew Brunson, who remains under house arrest in Turkey. Now U.S. religious leaders are urging companies not to do business with Turkey as long as Brunson remains in custody. Turkish and American business leaders will meet for an investment conference next week. Turkey's president is expected to attend, but faith leaders say he can't be trusted as long as Brunson is in jail. The U.S. Commission on International Freedom sent a letter to President Trump expressing its concerns for the pastor. Coming up, Scott Ross sits down with one of Israel's modern heroes, Natan Sharansky, as he shares his remarkable life story. When Jewish people return from around the world to live in Israel, it's a joyful end of a long journey. One of the more famous stories is that of Natan Sharansky, whose immigration from Russia to Israel paved the way for the exodus of 2 million Soviet Jews. CBN's Scott Ross has that story.
Natan Sharansky has been connecting Jewish people to Israel for 50 years. There was a time, however, he didn't see anything good about his heritage.
I was born in 1948 in the Soviet Union, in Ukraine. We had nothing Jewish in our life. We were absolutely assimilated. No Jewish institutions existed, no Jewish culture, no synagogue. But there was one very Jewish thing in our life, and it was anti-Semitism. There was nothing positive in my being Jewish. There was only negative.
That changed in 1967 when Israel defeated the armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan in the Six-Day War, reuniting Jerusalem under Israeli sovereignty.
Here, Israel emerges victorious after the attempt of Arab countries to destroy it. And the Soviet Union made a lot of efforts to destroy Israel.
It also marked the time Sharansky and other Soviet Jews began their search for what it meant to be Jewish.
Everybody connects you to Israel and says how your soldiers could do it. And you want to understand why for the world it is my soldiers. And that's when we started reading about ourselves, our history. And suddenly you discover that you have such a unique history, which starts not from this communist dictatorship, which starts from exodus from Egypt, and this desire to be free, and you discover that there is state of Israel, which is that you want to be part of it. That what gives you strength to start fighting for your right of a Jew to live, to go to Israel.
Would the Soviet Union allow you to emigrate?
It was impossible. It was the regime who already killed tens of millions of citizens. So they would have no problem to kill another few hundred Jews, but we were luckier. Our struggle from the very first day became the struggle of all the Jews in the world, and with the time also of many non-Jews. And they succeeded to link all the interests of Soviet Union with the fate of Soviet Jews.
As an advocate for human rights and the Zionist movement, Sharansky also became known as a refusenik, a Jew who was refused permission to leave the Soviet Union and immigrate to Israel.
When they arrested me finally after a few years of my activities, they accused me in high treason and explained that I will not get out alive, I'll be sentenced to death if I will not say publicly that they're right and we are wrong.
Sentenced to 14 years, he served 9, largely for spreading truth about human rights abuses in the Soviet Union. Now, I understand when you were in prison that one of the things that strengthened you was the Book of Psalms.
My Hebrew was not good enough, and I was reading, comparing different words, sentences, and it so happened that the first sentence which I understood fully was Psalm 23, and when I go through the valley of death, fear no evil because you are with me.
Were you a believer in God before this?
There is no physical explanation why you are ready to sacrifice your life if you don't understand that there are things which are much bigger than your physical survival. When I understood that I'm released, when they took away all the prison clothes, gave me silk clothes, and brought me to the airplane, so I was lying in the snow, refusing to move until they'll bring me back my psalm book.
You still have it?
It's always with me, yeah.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it.
Sharansky and his wife Avital were married one day before his arrest. She then led the charge for his release.
They crossed the border and the airplane from Israel took me, and that's how I met, after 12 years, my wife, and that's how I met all our Jewish people. So the day which started in Soviet KGB prison finished near the Kotel with thousands of our friends celebrating my release.
His struggle played a major role in the fall of the Iron Curtain, which opened the door for 2 million Jews to leave the Soviet Union. Years later, Sharansky headed the Jewish Agency, the organization that brings new immigrants to Israel.
So it is really the history of Exodus repeated itself in modern history.
Yeah. When you hear your enemies threaten and they're going to push you into the sea and destroy the state of Israel, how do you respond to that?
We have to stand against all this hypocrisy, against all this hatred, and we rely on us, on our faith, on our God, and on our friends.
When you look back through the history and you see where Israel is now, how do you feel about your country?
God speaks to us by His doings. Right. Simply look what He's doing with Jewish people, and that's the best proof of His presence. What happened with Soviet Union? Soviet Union doesn't exist. See what happened with Israel. There is no country in the free world with such a successful, strong economy. And we brought so many Jews from so many different cultures, and how they all are becoming one people united with one vision. So that's the miracle.
Scott Ross for CBN in Jerusalem.
Up next, in just 2 years, the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast has become a major meeting for Jews and Christians. Find out why when we come back. Christian leaders from around the world came to the city of Jerusalem for what's become a major annual event, the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast. I sat down with 3 key participants of this year's gathering. Well, it's great to be with you all to talk about the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast. Ann Graham Lotz, Albert Rexler, and member of Knesset, Robert Ilatov. Robert, can you tell us how this Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast got started 2 years ago?
As the chairman of the committee that promotes relations with the Christian world, I decided to do something extra to make contact between the Jewish state and the Christian world. And I thought Jerusalem is something that unites us on this topic, and that prayer for Jerusalem is a joint thing that can really push us forward in order that our relations will be warmer, direct, and more effective. When we speak about prayer for Jerusalem, praying for the peace of Jerusalem, we're speaking about the word shalom. Shalom has the root of wholeness, unity, completeness. These are the things that precede this word. Therefore, to pray for the peace of Jerusalem is to pray for her peace and also for her wholeness. This event is a truly unifying event, strengthening the relations between us and all the Christian world.
So now you've just had the 2nd annual Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast. What has happened in the past 2 years?
Well, it's been a miracle to see how these different leaders from all over the world have come together, sensing that this is their time to support Israel, to pray for Jerusalem. Because the calling of the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast is, of course, to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, according to the scriptures in Isaiah, where we read that God has deposited his watchmen on the walls of Jerusalem and asked them not to give him silence until he makes Jerusalem praise on the earth. It's really God's instrument of gathering people, mobilizing the church to stand with Israel and to pray for Jerusalem.
How would you describe the reaction of Christian leaders in the last couple of years to the Jerusalem prayer breakfast?
I think the response has been overwhelming, and it's been positive, to say the least. People have been very excited to get their invitation from the Knesset to come and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Because I believe this is the new thing here. You have a call come out of this house behind us to say to the Christian leaders, come, support us, and pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
And you were here on the second annual Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast. What did you think when you got the invitation?
I thought it was phenomenal. In fact, just what Albert has just described, the people around the world being moved of God's Spirit to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, that hasn't been happening in the past. So God is moving. I feel like His focus is very much, I mean, it always has been, but you just sense in the Christian world, God's focus on this city and this land and these people, and rallying people like me, a Gentile woman, and others from around the world to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and to pray for the people here. And so when I received my invitation from Robert Ilatov, it was very official. And he was explaining his heart and his vision and inviting me to come and participate, actually, to be a speaker. I mean, I met kings and people who were princes in the royal family and members of parliament from all over the world, as well as ordinary people like me or ministry leaders, pastors, who just, God has placed a burden on their hearts to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And, you know, I was born 1 week after Israel was reborn. So she was born on May 14th, I was May 21st, both 1948. So I feel like my life has been intertwined with Israel from the day I was born, actually. And so this is the year of God's favor, I believe, and the year of answered prayer, the year of blessing. The New Testament tells us that God's blessings are not just to hoard or to enjoy, but they're to bring us to deep repentance and a gratitude, a fresh gratitude to our God who sends all blessings that are worth having come from above. So, so when we're blessed in this 70th year, I believe it's a time to turn to God and to thank Him and to express our gratitude.
Robert, obviously you wanted to reach out to the Christian leaders around the world to have them pray for the peace of Jerusalem. How significant is Christian support for the state of Israel?
We see the connection and the support of the Christian world toward Israel as very strong in these last days, especially the Christians who believe in the Old and the New Testament, that this year we've reached 70 years since the establishment of the state of Israel. Actually, one of the prophecies fulfilled. And we're here. The Jews arrived and returned from all over the world to this land and established the state of Israel, revived the language, and we're continuing the commandment of God on this land.
And can I insert something?
Sure.
Because it's not just to unite us, but God is a prayer hearing, a prayer answering, a miracle working, covenant keeping God. So I believe God's calling people to pray because He wants to pour out His blessing in the 70th year and answer our prayers and bring peace to the hearts of people, bring peace to these people. So it's not just an exercise, you know, it's reaching out to the living God and asking for His blessing.
I want to invite you next year to join us in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem. I want to invite the Christian leadership to come next year to Jerusalem to participate in joint prayer.
Well, Minister of Knesset, Robert Ilatov, and Anne Graham Lotz, Albert Drexler, thanks you so much for talking about Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, and hopefully we'll be seeing that for the third one next year here in Jerusalem. Since we taped that interview, Anne Graham Lotz announced that she's been diagnosed with breast cancer. On her website, she said, "Each day since the diagnosis, God has given me promises and encouragement from His Word. God has been and is my refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, I will not fear." But He also has made it very clear that my healing will be an answer to not just my prayer, but the prayers of others for me. And she asked believers everywhere to pray for her. Coming up, Jews and many Christians around the world will be celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles or booths. Here's a look at how Israelis prepare for that Feast of the Lord. Just 5 days after Yom Kippur, Jewish people begin to celebrate Succoth, or the Feast of Tabernacles. In the book of Leviticus in the Bible, the Lord commands the Jewish people to build tabernacles or booths and live in them for 7 days. CBN News took a trip to the Jerusalem market known as the Shuk to see how people prepare for the feast and then what it takes to put a sukkah together. Take a look at what you can see on our social media channels.
So I just want to tell you what we're actually doing here. It's in the book of Leviticus, and it says you should take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, the boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook. These funny-looking lemons are called etrogs or citrons. They're citron fruits, and they are edible, but we don't buy them to eat at this time of the year. You want to make sure you get one that doesn't have a blemish in it, because it's a special fruit that it speaks about in the book of Leviticus for this holiday.
Chag Sameach.
Okay, here we are, and we're going to build a sukkah. So here we go. Chag Sameach. Have a happy holiday.
Well, it is amazing to see how these sukkahs are built all over the city and throughout the country. Well, that's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And to all our Jewish friends, Chag Sukkot Sameach. Happy Feast of Booths. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.